Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Down Syndrome Center podcast. Now, you might be wondering what is going on. This certainly is a different kind of opening than we've typically had. Well, we are celebrating our 100th podcast today for the Down Syndrome Center podcast, and we are so excited. We sent out a local request to our families in the area asking them, hey, would you send in your thoughts about how this podcast has impacted you? And we also put out a request for people to send in recordings of their kids playing their instrument of choice. And so I want to say thank you to Macy for that wonderful Jurassic Park introduction. It really gets me in the mood for this epic podcast that we're hoping to do today. And throughout this podcast, you're going to be hearing some piano music in the background from my friend Hannah. And at the end, we'll even include some of those statements that you guys had sent in that we had received about this impact. And even as her mother is sharing, my friend Joy will be playing the piano in the background of that one. And lastly, I really encourage you guys, check out the show notes of today's podcast as well, because there's a link to the YouTube for a music video that one of our listeners sent in about his daughter, a really beautiful song. All in all, this is just one big celebration, and we all know that people with Down syndrome, you know what, we usually love to celebrate with them, and they love to celebrate as well. So today, we are really celebrating this 100th podcast. You know, this podcast, it started here in March of 2009 in my head. That's when I took over at our Down Syndrome Center here at Children's Hospital. And I found that I was continually getting really a lot of the same questions and being asked a lot of things that I needed to cover during the visit, but there wasn't enough time to really get into the detail on every topic. And sometimes, really, to be quite honest with you, I don't have the specific knowledge of the subspecialty things that people were asking me to address all of these details effectively. So back in February of 2013, I created this podcast to be able to answer these questions, really intending it for our local families here in the Pittsburgh region. And as it turns out, our first episode was released on February 11th, 2013, and we've had a ton of different topics, including medical topics like constipation or reflux, ear infections, sinus infections, sleep apnea, thyroid disease, celiac, cardiac, whatever. We have pretty much covered a lot of those medical issues. But we've also talked about some school and educational expectations and advocacy along those lines. We've talked about developmental expectations, both gross motor, but speech and reading skills, and we've talked about special needs trusts and legal issues that can come up. We've talked about race and healthcare. We've talked about a lot of general pediatric issues like toilet training and behavior, ADHD, autism. We've talked about puberty. We've talked about sibling impact. Boy, we've had some special interest topics as well, looking at adoptions and video podcasts looking at orthotics and skin issues that have come on. And I tell you guys, the guests that we've had, initially we stayed local because we used to record this right in my office. Well, we still do kind of record it right in my office at work, but now with Zoom, the Zoom era really has kicked off a whole bunch of different opportunities to get national experts on most of these topics that we discuss. The person that I'm speaking with is the person who knows this topic better than anyone else in the world. And over the past year, I can tell you that our topics have been a lot of COVID-related questions, you can imagine, because it's so important to bring that accurate information to our families. And so I'm especially thankful to Dr. Nowak from our infectious diseases department here at Children's Hospital in Pittsburgh to bring his expertise for all of these COVID topics. So I guess I would ask, really, why is this so important? Why is this podcast so important? When I was originally thinking of creating it, I looked out into the land of podcasts and really couldn't find any medical podcasts related to Down syndrome. There were some family podcasts and things, and there still are some really excellent ones that way. But in terms of like a purely medical-based podcast, I really didn't see anything. And there's so many more topics and updates that I would love to provide. And in fact, even right now, I want to just encourage you, send us an email to downsyndromecenter@chp.edu. That's all one word, downsyndromecenter@chp.edu. And just let me know, what do you want me to cover? And In fact, we've got a huge lineup of podcasts on the way, all because of family questions. People who have sent in questions for us saying, hey, could you address this on your podcast? No question is too silly. Don't worry about, maybe they've already covered it. If you want it covered again, we'll find someone who will cover it again. Just send us those information. What is it that you want us to cover on this podcast? And then I would ask that you would just share the podcast on your social media. Share it with your friends and your loved ones so that we can really expand who we're able to touch. And really, who have we been able to touch? I can tell you, 100 podcasts. This is number 100. In just this year alone, 70 different countries have downloaded this podcast. Over the course of the whole podcast, it's even more countries than that. And we've had almost 100,000 downloads. I'm almost certain that this podcast will bring us over 100,000 downloads here in the next few days since it was first released. And I'll tell you just some statistics. The most popular podcasts are COVID related, of course. This past year, the COVID podcasts have been incredibly popular, and I understand why. We're all trying to figure it out and navigate this crazy time that we're in. But also the podcasts on behavior management, and probably my most favorite thing to see in the top 10 of podcasts is a video podcast that I did with my friend and self-advocate Daniel Chaplin. He was showing us how to wear a CPAP mask, really showing how it's possible. So many times people think, it's not possible, it'll never happen. And Daniel showed our audience and continues to this day on our podcast to be able to show them how he wears his CPAP mask. And I remember how I told you at the onset of this podcast, I told you how we were just trying to reach our local families. Well, get this. Since 2017, only 9% of the downloads in the U.S. have been from Pittsburgh, where this podcast originates from. That means 91% of our downloads are outside of our local region here. And then it gets even crazier in that 17% of the downloads aren't even from the U.S. So this podcast is reaching out to people all over the globe. And to that, I am truly humbled and amazed. This impact has been so much greater than I ever could have imagined. So again, I want to invite you guys, please, realize this is a podcast for you. This is something that I want to be able to serve our community all throughout the world. Of anything that comes up, any question that you have in your mind, send it to us. And we would love to be able to cover that. Down Syndrome Center at chp.edu again is that. And then I would like to give us a few parent and family testimonials here, and I'll be back right after that.
Hi. I have a 28-year-old son, Tony, with Down syndrome, who has some behavioral issues. I love the podcasts because I can learn a lot in a short amount of time, and they're so convenient. Respond but don't react has really been helpful to our family. Thank you for creating and sharing these with us. They're truly invaluable. Bye.
Hi, we're the McGrath family from Pittsburgh. Since our daughter was born 2 years ago, we have become avid listeners of this podcast.
It has been very informative, and we often share the topics that were covered with friends and family. It was especially helpful during this COVID pandemic.
Hi, Dr. Bellotti. Thank you so much for this podcast. It has been incredibly helpful for information, and especially during the COVID, getting the COVID updates. I send episodes to family members all the time and to friends on different topics, and certainly to Joy's grandparents during the pandemic, so they could understand a little bit of how safe or unsafe Joy was during this time. I also really, really appreciate that you covered race in medical care and in Down syndrome this past year. Thank you.
Well, I just want to thank you all for being just listeners to this podcast. It is just an amazing opportunity and a joy, really, to be able to share this with you. I want to thank all of our local families who participated. Macy, thank you for the beautiful intro on the clarinet, and Hannah and Joy on the piano throughout this podcast, and for our families that have called in and given those testimonials, and of course for Troy, who sent in this music video. Troy, one day maybe we'll meet in person, but it was a beautiful video. I'm amazed at how our community comes together and be able to celebrate things together like this 100th podcast. But I would not want to lose this 100th podcast opportunity to say thank you to my brother Das, who Without you, man, I would not be doing this. That's for sure. There would be no Down syndrome podcast. There wouldn't be probably me working in a Down syndrome clinic. I owe it all to you, my man. And I appreciate you more than you can imagine. But for all of our listeners, hey, send us some information. What is it that you'd like us to cover? Maybe if you wanted to send us your thoughts on the podcast via an email or a phone call, we would love to get that. Just send it to our email address, downsyndromecenter@chp.edu. But until next time, bye-bye.